From Eyewitness News, this is Newsmakers.
The gun debate has been a focus primarily with policymakers on the federal level, but state and city governments are scrutinizing local laws as well, especially in Providence, where gun violence is a daily threat to public safety. In the wake of the Newtown tragedy, what do city leaders want to see change? That and a push to combat chronic drinkers taxing the city's emergency services. Our guest on the first half of Newsmakers, Providence Public Safety Commissioner Stephen Pare. Then, the 113th Congress. Rhode Island sent familiar faces back to Washington. Is it a new day in D.C., or are more hyper-partisan battles on the horizon? Joining us via satellite from the nation's capital, WPRI.com reporter Ted Nesi on the second half of Newsmakers. Good morning. Welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. Joining me on the panel, political reporter for Rhode Island Public Radio, Ian Donis, and Eyewitness News analyst, Arlene Violet. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning, Commissioner. Thank you for joining us on the program.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Let's start with, we tape this program on a Friday morning. On Thursday, the Providence City Council voted to ask the General Assembly to ban semi-automatic weapons statewide. Do you support that move?
We do. I do support that move, but I haven't looked at the piece of legislation and the ordinance or the resolution that was put forward. Look, we have too many high-powered rifles, assault rifles in America. And so banning these assault rifles, I strongly support. They have no business on the streets of America. And so not knowing exactly what the resolution was, by banning these assault rifles, we are in full support. But it's much more complex than just that.
Well, that's the issue here, isn't it? Especially for Providence. The real challenge for Providence isn't necessarily the guns that are purchased legally. It's the ones that are obtained illegally, isn't it?
That's correct. We have way too many guns in the streets of Providence. We've been talking about this for 2 years that I've been the Commissioner of Public Safety. And we've had too many shootings over the last 2 years and probably the last decade. Look, we looked at a model out of New York City decades ago. It was similar, where there were a lot of shootings in New York City. They changed the culture. So regardless of who you are, if you carry a gun, never mind you have to use it. If you carry a gun in New York City, you're going to look at some stiff sanctions. We need to create that, and we've advocated in the last General Assembly to create that here for the city of Providence.
Commissioner, can you put a percentage on the level of gun-related crime in Providence that involves illegally owned or acquired guns?
Look, most of our either homicides or we have shootings every weekend. When I say shooting, shots fired at houses, at cars, and at people. We've had over year 105 actual shootings in 12. The previous year we had 110. We pull over 100 weapons every year off the streets of Providence. There are just way too many guns on the streets of Providence. Where they're coming from? They're coming from house breaks. They're coming from straw borrowers, where somebody legally purchases a variety of guns out of state, and then they peddle those guns in the Northeast.
So what I'm hearing,
that's a problem.
What I'm hearing from you is the resolution that was passed last night. That's not the legislation that you're looking for. The legislation you're looking for is to strengthen the laws on possession, correct?
Correct.
So it was the one that they're looking for, and if that were to pass, would that be essentially toothless for Providence?
Well, again, not knowing exactly what the resolution for supporting the ban on assault weapons and semi-automatic. There are a lot of semi-automatic weapons in America. There's a lot of guns in America. How you can ban that, and what this calls for is banning those semi-automatic weapons. I'm not sure how that's going to be implemented and also enforced as well. The bottom line, whether they're semi-automatic or just guns in general, there are too many, and that's causing the problems on the streets of Providence.
As you know, police chiefs can issue gun permits, certainly the Attorney General can issue gun permits. Has your chief issued any concealed weapon gun permits, and what do you think of the policy of Attorney General Peter Kilmartin relative to his issuance of gun permits?
You know, that's one area that we should consolidate. We're small enough where there should be one repository and one authority for issuing gun permits. I don't believe the police chiefs should be issuing gun permits. It should go to one standard across the state, and if it's the Attorney General that's now doing it, that's where I think it ought to reside. But the gun permitting isn't necessarily the problem that we're seeing on the streets of Providence.
Is the absence of more stringent gun laws in Rhode Island due to the lobbying influence of the NRA?
Sure. There's a lot of info. When I was superintendent of the state police, we tried to change that very piece of legislation and received resolutions from over half of the municipalities in the state, and just changed that one word from shall to can. And so it takes that discretion out of the police chiefs, and then most of the police chiefs would say, look, one permitting agency, that's the Attorney General, and we couldn't get a hearing on it. So there's a strong lobby for our Constitution and our Second Amendment to right to bear arms. I think we're beyond that. You know, there's just too many guns, and there's a lot of areas that we need to strengthen here in the state of Rhode Island that will help enormously. One of it is stronger sanctions for carrying a weapon in the city of Providence. The permitting aspect of it, we should have a gun registry here in the state like Massachusetts has, and there are other measures that we should consider in light of the tragedy that we saw in our neighboring state.
Do you think it'll be different this year at the General Assembly because of Newtown?
I think we have renewed attention to a problem in America, and unfortunately it took 20 young kids and 6 adults not far from the state of Rhode Island to be tragically gunned down by someone. Look, we don't even have the ability to ban those who are mentally or emotionally challenged here in the state. We need to connect that. We're in this day and age in technology, we should be able to do that seamlessly in protecting the rights under HIPAA and the privacy issues, but we can figure this out.
Commissioner, the FBI, as you know, tracks crime stats nationally, and this is very important. It's an important metric for the public to know trends in the community and how they compare nationally. For the 2011 year, the most recent data available, only 3 cities in America with a population of over 100,000 people failed to file their crime stats with the FBI. That includes Providence. Mm-hmm. What happened?
Yeah, that was a technological glitch that we take responsibility for. It wasn't where we just failed for the entire year. We didn't submit the quarterly reports, and thereby they reject the entire year. They have the data. Our crime data is put up on the website almost immediately. We have a system where you can go and look at the crime. We provide our crime data on a quarterly basis to the state police, who is the state repository for the FBI. And last year, we failed to submit a quarterly crime data, and so the entire year wasn't submitted to the FBI. What do you mean by
technical glitch? I mean, this is something that the department does every single year, and has that been rectified?
It has been rectified. We missed the deadline for the submittal of electronic data, and so it gets a little more complex because in our records management system, we have to reconcile and do quality assurance because it changes. Somebody reports a crime and we investigate, and it's not what they reported, or we can't sustain what the allegations were, and so we have to be reflective of what the actual crime is. So there's quality control. We missed the deadline because we're reconciling and trying to make the crime data as reflective and accurate.
Now. They have it now.
They have it now, and it's up on the website. Yes.
Okay. Commissioner, what's the directive do you give to the police on the streets when they do a routine stop? Someone has a headlight out, failing to yield to a stop sign, etc. What's the directive relative to checking their legal status?
Of their immigration leave?
Yes.
We do not ask what the immigration status of anyone. There's no need to, and we don't ask for that information unless it comes into the bigger investigation. So for a motor vehicle stop, we don't ask whether they have a green card or they're here legally or illegally.
Have you referred any cases to ICE in the year 2011, 2012 as a result of any stop?
We do, and
you have?
We have, because it's automated. So secure communities is what I think you're talking about a bit, and that's an electronic system where if someone gets stopped and gets arrested, ICE is automatically notified, and if there's a detainer or a warrant for their deportation, it's seamless. We don't physically pick up the phone and call ICE. It's done electronically.
So the arrest is the trigger.
The arrest is the trigger, absolutely.
A nonprofit institute in Providence that works to reduce violence recently had to lay off a large part of its staff due to funding shortages. Are you concerned that that's going to lead to an increase in violence? And do you see any hope that those positions at Tenny Gross's institute can be restored?
Yeah, we're hugely concerned with the reduction of street workers, and I know the work of Tenny and his group, and I know the controversy as well, but they've been extremely helpful in mitigating and preventing some violence in the streets of Providence. I know the mayor has vowed to support and help raise some money for the Institute. It works. It's controversial, but it works. We've seen shootings and gang rivalries stop as a result of their work. So we're hoping that we can find money and restore some of that funding, because for us, those street workers play a significant role in violence.
Commissioner, in an effort to combat the drain chronic drinkers have on the city's emergency services, a new program is being examined that would put less stress on the rescues, the ambulances, and the ERs, possibly using a van to bring these chronic drinkers to rehab. About 5 years ago, I did a story on this subject. I rode around with Rescue One for a couple of weeks. And then we went undercover on a liquor store, and we saw that they were just selling cheap booze to people who were clearly intoxicated, and people who are down on their luck. And we got their license suspended for a while. But I can tell you, just talking to firefighters, that this stuff is still going on. Mm-hmm. With the other plan to the side about vanning people to rehab facilities, what can the police department do to crack down on these liquor stores that are clearly violating the law by serving and selling alcohol to people who are intoxicated?
Right. When we're able to develop a case like that, whether it's taking someone that leaves that liquor store that's clearly intoxicated and just purchased, then our licensing folks, our detectives in the Providence Police Department, will bring those cases before the Board of Licensing.
That doesn't happen that often, though. So
probably not.
Do you think that is that an area that you're looking at to step up in conjunction with this other plan you're working on with the state?
We haven't focused on that area. I know it's a problem, and to what degree and how significant, I don't know the answer to that.
My point is, they get the alcohol from somewhere.
Sure.
And it's not the black market.
Sure.
Right. It's these vendors that are,
Right.
They just walk in, or in these cases, they stumble in.
Right.
So there is a division dedicated to that, correct?
There is a division dedicated. Our retailers, our license holders in the city of Providence should not be selling, alcohol to an intoxicated person, and particularly those who struggle with alcoholism. There's a bigger problem when we have a number of people that use our 911 system frequently, using the emergency department frequently, putting a heavy burden on our healthcare system and our transportation system. We just changed our policy in the city of Providence for both our 911 rescue runs. They were overused and they were abused. We're changing that. We ask the public, if it's a true emergency, you're having trouble breathing, you're having chest pains, please call. That's what we're here for. If you have an earache or something that is non-emergent, then please don't call, because you're taking a resource that we're tying up.
That's a huge challenge, isn't it?
It is a huge
there's
challenge.
This medical taxi, kind of thinking that many people have there.
People call our 911 for a rescue call to their home because they don't have transportation to their physician's appointment. And there's a lot of abuse. I think, and I know 911's been overused in this country. We need to change the efficiency in delivering medical care to our community, but really, because we saw this in mutual aid as well, calling upon our towns and cities to help us with rescue runs. We need to change that, and it's going to take a big effort both internally and to the public in how they should be using 911.
Your police officers spend a lot of time testifying in front of the Board of Licenses relative to all these club fights, shootings, etc. In your view, is the Board of Licenses doing enough to crack down? Do they have the instruments or the laws to help them crack down? Because it seems that, particularly during the summertime, it's out of control at some of these clubs.
Yeah.
Less than a minute left.
Okay. Yeah, we're working with the Board of Licensing, and I think we've had a couple cases in the past 6 or 8 months that we've gone for revocation. Look, they're responsible. If they want to run a business, they have to run a safe business. We rely on them. We can't put police officers in every club, and we're going to hold them accountable when we have violence in clubs.
Are they doing that? The Board of Licenses strict enough?
They are. They are doing it, and we're going to continue to work with them and hold them, responsible when it's a public safety concern. So I believe they are, and we're going to continue and improve.
Providence Public Safety Commissioner Stephen Pare, thank you very much for joining us on the program this week.
Thanks for having me.
All right, coming up, goodbye 112, hello 113. A new Congress gets its start, and WPRI.com reporter Ted Nesi has a front row seat. He joins us via satellite from Washington, D.C. Stay with us. You're watching Newsmakers. Welcome back to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. Well, it wouldn't be a Sunday morning without Ted Nesi, so we had him join us live via satellite from our nation's capital. He's down there as the 113th Congress gets its start. Ted, you sat down with all 4 members of our delegation earlier in the week in the wake of the fiscal cliff vote, which went into the wee hours, especially on the Senate side. How were they?
Jack Reed in particular, Senator Jack Reed, seemed exhausted, I think, from the very late night there was on Monday and into Tuesday on New Year's to get that deal done. And Sheldon Whitehouse, Senator Whitehouse as well, seemed a little exhausted by the brinksmanship that keeps happening. We have these rolling crises every time a fiscal deadline is coming. And it was interesting, too, to contrast that with what I saw when I met up with newly elected Massachusetts Congressman Joe Kennedy and newly elected Senator Elizabeth Warren. They were energetic, excited, looking forward to starting their terms, and sort of seemed like they hadn't been ground down yet because they haven't been a part of the muck down here. But I think, Senator Reed and Senator Whitehouse, as well as Congressman Langevin and Cicilline, all said the same thing. This is really not a great way to legislate. To keep having these things come up very late, no time to debate them, on the edge of a deadline is just not necessarily conducive to thoughtful policy making.
Well, it's interesting you say ground down. Senator Warren and Congressman Kennedy haven't seen that yet. Congressman Joe Kennedy. There was a sense of optimism on election night when I was talking to our delegation at the Biltmore Hotel that with the new term, with President Obama winning a re-election, that things might be a little bit less caustic down there. What is your sense now? Is it less hyper-partisan than it was before? Is it more of the same?
Well, Tim, you and I were talking the day I left, and Politico had a story that morning about the fiscal cliff negotiations where Speaker John Boehner allegedly swore at Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid while they were waiting by the Oval Office. So you can see how the mood has shifted. I think, Congressman Langevin and Congressman Cicilline in particular, because they're in the House, in the minority, the Republicans run the House, and also because the House Republican caucus is so divided right now, as we saw with their divisions over how to deal with the fiscal cliff, I think they're particularly concerned. Even when you talk to the senators, Senator Whitehouse was adamant that the Senate is working better than people think. They've had a number of major bills where Republicans and Democrats have been able to work together: Sandy relief, a highway bill, the fiscal cliff compromise. And he said, it goes over to the House, and the Republicans themselves aren't sure what to do, and then they don't bring in the Democrats the way they do in the Senate. So, they're kind of on the outside looking into that because they're all Democrats themselves. But they have hope, especially the congressman, that things could be better. Congressman Cicilline, I sort of challenged him on that because it doesn't seem to be why anything would change. He said he thinks it's going to come from the bottom up, that constituents at home will tell the lawmakers, we want you to get something done. He says he hears it all the time, and he has trouble believing that members of the Republican side wouldn't be hearing some of the same things from their constituents. But I think it remains to be seen if anything's really going to change in this Congress.
The fiscal cliff deal specifically, that passed, including an income tax hike for individuals making $400,000 or more, for families making $450,000, plus the payroll tax cut expired. But to that income tax issue, Ted, Senator Whitehouse, one of the most liberal senators in Washington, D.C., he wanted to see that ceiling, that tax ceiling, be $250,000. Was he upset at all that the end game on this was $400,000 and $450,000?
Well, actually, Tim, to my surprise, it was Senator Jack Reed who was more upset, it seemed in my interviews, than Senator Whitehouse that President Obama didn't fight harder for that $250,000 threshold. Senator Whitehouse, obviously a leading liberal voice in that caucus, though he usually votes the same way as Senator Jack Reed in the end. But Senator Jack Reed said he felt that there are a lot of impacts down the line by allowing this to go higher, and he said the White House, he thinks, could have held firm longer on that number, maybe gotten a better deal. He said that's going to affect every debate they have going forward about how many programs have to be cut, how deep the cuts have to be. Senator Whitehouse, on the other hand, somewhat surprisingly for someone who's known as such a staunch liberal, said he'd had discussions in the Budget Committee already with other Democrats about going to a higher level, so he felt since he'd already considered that there, he couldn't be too upset when that got into the final bill.
Would you say that Senator Reed then is, or any member of the delegation, but based on your answer there, Senator Reed, are they angry with the president and signing off on this deal? I mean, we should point out, right, Ted, that they all voted to pass it.
They did. All four members of Rhode Island's delegation voted to pass it, and honestly, it didn't even seem like it was a close call for most of them, even if they didn't love the deal. I think angry is probably a step too far. I think frustrated is probably better, particularly in Senator Reed's case. You know, though Senator Whitehouse, even if he wasn't too upset with this deal, I said to him point blank, you know, are you worried about the president's ability to negotiate a good deal on the debt ceiling, which is now coming up just in the next 2 months? And he looked at me for a long time and just sort of shrugged and said, you know, time will tell if the president can do it. So not a huge vote of confidence from one of the leading Senate Democrats on the president's ability to get a deal he can support.
That is certainly not a ringing endorsement, to say the least. And in fact, it was Vice President Joe Biden that looked like, you know, he came in to save the day. Does that speak to exactly what you think Senator Whitehouse is talking about?
I think so. I think the Senate Democrats, and I should say the White House, feels like sometimes the Senate Democrats undercut President Obama in these negotiations too. But, you know, Senator Whitehouse, who called him with the details, he said it was Vice President Biden called him at about 5:30 p.m. on New Year's Eve. They talked for a half hour or so. He led him through the deal. I have to think that call was, you know, partly a sign of respect to a senator, but also trying to feel out whether these compromises were too much for the liberal side of the Democratic caucus or whether they could live with it. I know he called others as well. I think they want to make sure they get a deal, and they want to make sure the Republicans can't use the debt ceiling to sort of take President Obama hostage, but there doesn't seem to be a huge amount of confidence that the president knows how to manage such a difficult negotiation.
Let's shift gears here. You filed a pretty interesting report that I caught from D.C. when you interviewed Senator Elizabeth Warren and Congressman Joe Kennedy, and I should say at the time when you interviewed them, they were still elect, right? They hadn't been sworn in, that there was a special connection between Joe Kennedy and Elizabeth Warren. Talk about that.
This was kind of a funny story, yeah. I sat down with Joe Kennedy first. This was both just a few hours before their swearing-in ceremonies. And he said to me, you know, I met my wife. Kennedy is 32. He just got married within the last 2 months or so. He said, I met my wife in Senator Warren's class. He and his wife, Lauren, were both students at Harvard Law School. They took a class with then Professor Elizabeth Warren, and they both were in that class. They were in study groups together or whatnot, and that's how they met up. And I talked to Senator Warren later, Senator-elect at the time, and she said she remembered Joe Kennedy sitting in front row and his wife, future wife Lauren, in the back. She said there are 6 couples that came out of that class, and she takes credit for all of them.
Is Senator Warren is on the banking committee. I have to imagine, and Senator Reed is on that same committee, that Reed is optimistic about her presence on the banking committee, but I'm wondering if banks are trembling at that prospect.
Yeah, Jack Reed, he definitely pushed in his usual somewhat quiet way behind the scenes to get her named to that committee, the banking committee. I asked her, should the banks be scared? And she said, you'll have to ask them. And then I said, well, do you think they should be scared? She said her belief is in accountability for the banks, and as long as they're transparent, they won't have a problem with her. But of course, her version of accountability and transparency may not be one the banks are thrilled about. Wall Street, they certainly weren't excited for her to become a senator.
Transparency in banks. Okay, let me ask you about Congressman David Cicilline. He just came off a tough re-election campaign. What was he like? Was he relieved now that he's not running scared?
There's a real, there was like an excitement in Cicilline's office. I think if you think about it, like you say, Tim, he spent almost his entire first 2 years running for office for re-election with the Providence dogging him and anything. This time, I've come down before, this time he was relaxed, he was excited, he was talking about his plans for what to do. His staff had sort of that same bubbly momentum that they were going to get things done. I think it's a relief to him that he can finally, his political future looks very secure. He won a pretty commanding victory over Brendan Doherty, and I think now he's looking ahead as really focusing on his time as a congressman and what he can do in Washington, though of course that's limited by the fact that he's still in the minority, just as Jim Langevin is.
We just had a video of Speaker Boehner and David Cicilline. Talk about an odd couple. All right, Ted Nesi from Washington, D.C., thank you for joining us today. If you missed any of his stuff, you can catch it online, WPRI.com under Nesi's Notes. I'm Tim White. We'll see you next week on Newsmakers.